Y'all know what it is. We've got Ty Hayes from Around the Table Sports. He does a plethora of content around Bama for multiple channels as of late. Ty, how you doing on this fine Saturday morning?
Uh, Man, where do I start? The absolute roller coaster of emotions this week has been, and I woke up this morning thinking, like, okay, let's just no more big news until Monday, and then T Rob hits that he's going from Bama to Georgia in a move that's quite frankly stunning and a phenomenal move for Kirby Smart and the Dogs, but one that leaves questions, certain questions to be answered for the Crimson Tide.
It does. It does. And we're going to definitely dive into that. We're going to talk about the new head coach that came in and everything. But Ty, tell the people all this content you're making, not only your channel, but where else are they can find you nowadays?
Yeah, so you can find me at Around the Table Sports, pretty much every day doing all sorts of content, just any sort of college football content that I can think of, I'm there. You can find me Tuesday evenings on the Bama Standard, talking with former Alabama players like Matt Caddell, Chris James. You can find me most Wednesday mornings over on Bama Football with Kyle Henderson. Was on stream with him yesterday as he hit 100,000 subscribers. That was awesome. Kyle's a great dude, really plugged into SEC football. I highly recommend to follow. You can catch me on SEC Connect, and on the off chance, you can catch me on Bleacher Report.
Yeah, see what I'm saying? Everywhere. Ty, you've been doing it big, but we had to dive into this. I want to break it down because Nick Saban retiring was huge. You can go to Around the Table Sports, you'll see the breakdown from Ty on that, and then all those other locations where he did even more breakdowns of losing the GOAT. He's the GOAT. He's the best coach to ever coach in college football, period, point blank. And the crazy thing is, and even in celebration of Alabama, is that y'all have the number one and number two coaches in college football history, which, I mean, unquestioned. You can't argue between Bear and Nick Saban and what they've done in their eras. A lot of coaches have done some cool stuff, but nothing has been done similar to what those two have done. But Saban retires, and then the hunt starts, right? And so when I'm looking at this, of course, as a Sooner fan. How does this really affect Oklahoma long term, along with college football itself? And so Bama went out, got to me the top candidate out there in college football in Kalen DeBoer, coming from Washington there to Alabama. And the best part is DeBoer comes in with a fantastic resume. He's 104 and like 12 in
104
his.
and 12, 25 and 3 at Washington. He inherited a Washington program that went 4 and 8 the year he got before he got there and had the number 108th ranked scoring offense in the nation. He took that program from 4 and 8 to 11 and 2 in year 2 and went from the number 108 scoring offense in the nation to a top 15 scoring offense in the nation. And then in his second year, 14 and 1, national championship, top 15 offense. The rest is history.
Rest is history. So he's done everything that you could imagine and expect out of what you could dream of from a coach. It's not say expect, because he went to a Washington program, as you mentioned, were 4 and 8 the year before he got there, and that they weren't good, right? Jimmy Lake just did not make it happen when he took over for Chris Peterson. Yet Chris Peterson had the program humming well enough, but never at this level, right? Then, I mean, I think Chris Peterson did get them to a playoff at the beginning of the inauguration of college football playoffs, and of course lost to Nick Saban and Alabama Crimson Tide in the first round. DeBoer walks in there and at the perfect time of college football transition with the transfer portal, with NIL, and was able to take all of those, older classmen and make a contender out of them to the point that, like I said, they played in the national championship. And so now Bama has them. Ty, give us a little synopsis on how you felt about that hire in comparison to any other candidates out there.
Well, it's super interesting because Jimmy Sexton, man, what can you say? That man got
That
so
guy.
many people paid. He is phenomenal at his job. I just pray one day I can be half as good at whatever I do as Jimmy Sexton is at what he does. Fantastic articles on ESPN kind of highlighting some of what went down in this Alabama coaching search. I highly recommend looking at it. I was excited, Jay. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean there aren't legitimate questions here. I'm not going to go as far as to say concerns, because I think concerns is a strong word, but there are questions. The chief question I have is recruiting in the SEC, because Coach Sean over on Bama Football with Kyle Henderson, he made a phenomenal point the other day as we were all in there talking. You could sign the number 12 recruiting class in the nation and be patting yourself on the back saying, I signed a great class. You're number 6 in the SEC. You're number 7 in the SEC. with the number 12 recruiting class in the nation. It's different recruiting in the SEC, and you have got to be able to do so. Now, listen, I think if we're talking X's and O's, there really weren't too many coaches out there that were viable options that I think are any better than Kalen DeBoer. You heard a lot of smoke about Dan Lanning. You heard a lot of smoke about Steve Sarkisian. But, Jay, this is what's interesting to me. There's a lot of people that were kind of down on this hire and were more apt to take Steve Sarkisian or Dan Lanning. And I get it from a recruiting standpoint. Both of them have been in the SEC, Sark going to the SEC, and both of them understand recruiting there. But Kalen DeBoer is 5-0 against Dan Lanning and Steve Sarkisian. He's beaten Sark twice. He's beaten Dan Lanning 3 times. So coaching ability is not the question when it comes to Kalen DeBoer. That is, if anything, that's the answer. The genuine question is recruiting in the SEC. You have got to be able to, honestly, and I know this is going to sound hyperbolic, but it's true. We've talked this about Sooners whenever y'all lost Lincoln Riley. You need to push for top 10 classes if you want to really compete at the highest level in college football. You got to have top 10 classes.
Agreed.
And so that's the big question right now.
Yeah, when you look at DeBoer coming in, I mean, recruiting hasn't been his quote unquote strongest suit, but like I said, he was able to go 11-2 and 13-1 with Washington. The other big thing for the way that he's done things in his career, like you said, 104-12 in his career. That's pretty impressive for a head coach that hasn't been at a place longer than 3 years. Now, this is one of those jobs that this is basically at the top of the career chart, just top of the career ladder. You don't leave once you go to this program unless you feel like they're going to can you. And so you decide to transition to another blue blood within it, which that's kind of the thing with the Lincoln Riley piece in Oklahoma and why he leaves Oklahoma, going to USC. He went to another blue blood, in theory, right? And it's more of I just don't feel like I can do it at this program. And then the next guy comes in, Brent Venables, and does the exact same thing with the recruiting classes. So there's not much that you could really say as far as can it be done or can't it be done, because we know it can be done in all these programs. So DeBoer coming in, no history of real recruiting, like at the level that you got to be at the SEC. How do you feel like he'll fit? Because when I looked at it, DeBoer comes in, looks like a report's coming down this morning that he's going to bring Ryan Grubb as well as the wide receiver coach. What's his name?
Jamarcus Shepard.
Jamarcus Shepard. I knew his Shepard was his last name. So Jamarcus Shepard. But on the defensive side, it looks like, T-Rob is headed over to Georgia, the secondary coach. He's going to Georgia to be a co-defensive coordinator, secondary coach. So DeBoer coming into the SEC, how do you feel like that's going to work with the staff of him bringing in and who he's potentially losing from that Bama squad?
So, look, there's no doubt losing T-Rob is a hit. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise. And, Jay, you're now in the SEC, too. Georgia just got one of the best recruiters in all of college football. They didn't need that.
They really didn't.
Spoiled in riches over there. Georgia just got the number 1 class in the nation, and then on top of that, just pulled in one of the best defensive back coaches and one of the best recruiters in all of college football. That's a problem for all of us SEC fans. If you support a program in the SEC, your path just got a little bit more difficult. Let's be honest here. In terms of the offensive staff, Jay, I think that the offensive staff they'll be able to recruit off of results, right? One thing you heard from Chris Lowe is talking about Kalen DeBoer and how everywhere he goes, people just think so highly of him. And relationships are key in college football. I think that you can recruit based on just showing these are the results I did with the wide receivers I had. But there's a name that hopped off the plane with Kalen DeBoer that when I saw him behind him, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And that's Courtney Morgan. Now, for those of you not aware, Courtney Morgan pieced together the roster at Michigan before going from Michigan to Washington. This is a guy that had his hand in the recruiting and the evaluation of the 2 teams that just got done playing in the national championship. So I'm not saying that's going to be an instant thing for Alabama. Please don't get disenfranchised into thinking I believe that. What I'm saying is if recruiting and evaluation and all that is a question and you see that guy get out the play and you're like, okay, that's a good start. That's a really good start. Defensively, Jay, I would hope I was hoping T. Rob would get defensive coordinator. I made that no secret. When Kalen
Yep.
DeBoer was hired, I even said it in my video. It's not my decision to make. He'll choose his staff, but it was up to me. Not that you're asking. I'd get T. Rob, right? That didn't work out. I think in a perfect world, you have got to have someone with SEC affiliation, right? Like Glenn Schumann would be interesting just because he is an Alabama alum. He's coached at Alabama in an analyst capacity. He's currently at Georgia at a co-defensive coordinator position with T-Rob. Could you entice him back? I don't know, right? Like, I genuinely don't know. Leaving Georgia, that's a great job right now. There's very little reason to leave, but the only thing I think works in Alabama's favor is he is an Alabama alum, and you just don't get the opportunity to run the defense at your alum very often, right? That's enticing. Alabama needs to do something on the defensive side, though, because Washington, their secondary was not terrible. Their secondary was a lot better than people give them credit for. They had an awful rush defense.
Yeah.
And in the SEC, you got to stop the run. You have got to stop the run or you're going to have a bad time. That's another question, right? Like the defensive side of the ball. So I'm hoping you get some coaches that understand the SEC landscape. Can you retain a Freddie Roach, right? That's another big name to be watching right now.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many people on the defensive staff they're going to figure out how to retain, because that was the one thing, me and you had talked about before was to be successful in the SEC, you're going to have some sort of SEC affiliation. You can't just walk in to the SEC and think that you're going to just start running things. Now, granted, Kalen DeBoer has the resume on the offensive side, especially bringing in Shepard and Grubb on, getting wide receivers. I mean, hell, Washington had 3 number 1 wide receivers. That's how good that room was. And like I said, Courtney Morgan was there as that GM for Michigan and Washington. He was able to build it. I was reading an article about him, and I thought this was what made it so fascinating to me is he's a Michigan man. He's from Michigan, played at Michigan, right? And he decided to leave. He went with DeBoer to Fresno State for a bit, left, went back to Michigan, and the minute that DeBoer got the job at Washington, DeBoer called him and said, hey, man, I would like you to come run this. And the first thing Courtney Morgan was thinking about on that, based upon this article, was if I go to Washington and do what I'm doing here in Michigan, my respect level just skyrockets, right? It's Michigan. I'm always going to get really good players in Michigan. So people are going to say, it's Michigan. You're going to get those guys. If I go to Washington and build something there, it's just going to just catapult my career. And sure enough, the minute DeBoer got this job, he's going to bring Courtney. He's going to say, yeah, I need you to build this. And the man is a really good relationship guy. He's really good in recruiting. And as mentioned, he helped build this Michigan team. He was there at the foundation of today's Michigan team 3 years ago. He was there as their director of recruiting, helping put this together. And man, that is a huge pickup for you all. And so, no, you're right. And really the way all of this affects a lot of the SEC itself is if with T-Rob going to Georgia, that stresses me a little bit because, like you said, he's one of the best recruiters out there in the game, right? Bringing in Caleb Downs and
Jalen Mbakwe. I mean,
yep. Just don't let Caleb Downs leave. Or
I know.
Oklahoma.
No. I
we only
can't
got
take
2
that.
places that dude's acceptable and going because we're watching players, for the most part from Bama decide to hit the portal. We've seen one, it looks like, it's getting a prediction to Texas, and Bond is a monster. It's going to depress the hell out of me seeing that. But hopefully just, Texas does what Texas does and doesn't, make it pan out. But overall, I think college football, we losing the GOAT, college football itself may have leveled itself a little bit more. Like it's going to be more opportunities to win. But I think someone's going to step up and really start making it tough for everybody else. The curious question I have is, will it be Kirby Smart based upon the fact that he had back-to-back national championships? We know it ain't Michigan because it looks like that Harbaugh is being courted by the NFL again. But who else can really take the reins and be that team that goes on a masterful run in college football? I don't know if I can think of anybody that could truly, as a Sooner fan, I don't think we could do it. I think that we can stay in the top, but I don't see us making a run that's even close to what to what Saban did. I don't think anybody. I mean, hell, I think the closest run you're going to see is maybe someone getting 2 to 3 titles over a 15-year span, like a LSU type setup. The closest thing in which now Brian Kelly's definitely going to get himself one ring before he gets fired. That just annoys me. But Ty, wrapping up for college football, how do you think this really changes the game with this staff coming in and Saban retiring?
Well, listen, it massively changes the game, right? Saban was the godfather, essentially. Like we always talk about Coach Johnson up there at Ohio State being the godfather of defensive line recruiting. Well, Saban was the godfather of college football.
Yep.
I mean, at one point or another, right? Like they've been trading blows, Georgia, Bama winning natties. It's just incredible the consistency they've had. So this affects all of college football. I said this on Bleacher Report. They asked me, Bleacher Report did, who wins and who loses in this scenario where Saban retires. I said college football on both sides. Because you don't see success like this often, right? We say things are great, we ascribe this or that to be great, but true greatness doesn't come around every day. Saban was truly great. Yep. And because of that, college football as a whole lost. But the flip side of that is now they don't have to worry about Nick Saban. And I'm sure every coach in the nation, even Kirby, took a collective sigh of thank God. He is out now. I like the hire of Kalen DeBoer, but I just want Alabama fans to be patient, right? Like there is going to be change. There is going to be an adjustment period. I think that we can get through the adjustment period and still be a competitive team. But we need patience. He needs to assemble his staff, and there are some legitimate questions, but I am excited, man. Like some people have been saying, oh, y'all are already excited about a new coach. And it's like, yeah, what are you supposed to do? Be sad all the time? Like, no, it hurts Saban retired. But, like, Bama had to make a move, and they made as good of a move as I think you probably could have done when Nick Saban retires. Someone on Twitter, Jay, said this is an underwhelming hire. And I have a question to kind of ask you. Is this an underwhelming hire because the guy is backing up Nick Saban, or is it an underwhelming hire? Like basically meaning, is it underwhelming being viewed in the lens of, oh, this guy is taking over for Nick Saban, the GOAT, or is it just like an underwhelming hire? For me, I think a lot of people and Alabama fans are underwhelmed because this guy's backing up the greatest of all time, and your expectations just aren't going to be met because there's not another Saban.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I think it's an underwhelming hire because it was going to be an underwhelming hire regardless of who they hired, right? You're backing up Nick Saban. There's nobody in college. Let me back that up. There's one name you could have hired to make me say, oh, okay, that's pretty huge. Kirby Smart.
That's it.
There's nobody else in college football that would make me say, this is a huge hire besides a Kirby Smart, because Kirby came from there. He worked there for 9 years, and he wasn't going to leave Georgia for Alabama because he's a Georgia alum. He was going to go home and stay. The only job I see Kirby Smart taking is the Falcons. And I've been talking about this like crazy, that I would not be surprised if the Falcons backed up the Brinks truck and pay him like he's a college football coach in the NFL, which would be one of those rare things. It's like more like a Belichickian type stuff. You pay a guy to do all of that. I can see the Falcons doing that because they're desperate to try to win. But Kirby, I don't see Kirby leaving Georgia until they tell him that he has to leave. They gave Mark Richt almost 20 years to not get over the hump. And why wouldn't they do it for Kirby, who has back-to-back titles, right? You know, Georgia understands that dynasties don't last forever, and they're going to enjoy what ride they get out of this. But yeah, the DeBoer hire, to me, what only thing that's really underwhelming about the DeBoer hire, and I mentioned it before as a recruiting aspect, is DeBoer doesn't have history with very many places. He's jumped around every 2 to 3 years. He's going somewhere else, which in all actuality means he's never playing with his own recruits. He really doesn't have very many of his own recruits to play with. And it's not a bad thing going into Alabama, because Alabama's going to have the creme de la creme, the top of the charts recruits. So all he's got to do is make sure that he doesn't fumble the bag, right? You've got him. Keep 10-win seasons going. From there, if you can continue with your recruiting class, 4 years from now is when I can actually judge Kalen DeBoer. I can't judge him with Bama talent because I know he can coach. I can't judge him until 4 years from now, unless he fumbles the bag within these first 3 years with Bama talent, right? That's the only time I could truly judge him. and say, yeah, this may be a bad hire. But no, that's a fair point of this being an underwhelming hire only because you're following Nick Saban. Like, how do you replace the GOAT? And funny because the biggest rumor floating around is most people didn't want to take this job because they didn't want to be the dude right behind Nick Saban, which to me, it's funny because Bama only had a couple of dudes on the list of people that they were serious going to go after.
Yeah.
Shout out, like you said, Jimmy Sexton, because he knew that. So he went out there and got all his people money. Right? It's funny when we was texting this morning. The first thing I thought when I saw Sark get his raise, Dan Lanning's going to get a raise, seeing Norvell get his raise, I looked at all of those and said, oh, yeah, Bama didn't reach out to any of those dudes. Now, you mentioned Sark earlier. Makes sense. But because, Sark's a, former assistant underneath Nick Saban, and I could totally see them going out. Lane Kiffin was one that a lot of people threw out there. I'm not calling Lane. But Sexton got his guys raises. That's what he does. I'm just still disappointed in him about the A&M situation. He went in there and just, why would he do them a solid? Like, gut them, man. Take all their money. We want them to be broke, even though they won't be. But no, it's only underwhelming because DeBoer is following the GOAT. Now, the question is going to be, what does he do with everything that Saban left? Because Saban's going to probably be around. He's going to do probably NFL, NBA. He can be an analyst on ESPN, not on NFL, NBA. He's an ESPN analyst for college because that's going to keep him busy. He's going to make a killing doing that. He's probably going to stick around and help as much as needed at Bama because, him and Miss Terry are basically the mayors of Tuscaloosa and they're the governors of Alabama.
Pretty much.
They're going to be around. It's just he's just not going to be pulling the strings anymore. I saw somebody tweet out, does Saban have a daughter that he passed all of these genes on to, and can she come in and be the new head coach and be just like him? And it's just hilarious to think that. But be curious to if he could pull the strings with the daughter. I digress. DeBoer is a good hire because of his track record of going in places and keeping wins coming down the line. Question is, in 4 years, what does he look like with his own recruits?
Yeah, very true. Very true.
And with the portal, luckily with the portal, it appears it helps. And I totally understand the coach wanting to get out the game because the portal is maddening. And I love it so much. I just love it.
Tampering
love everything about it.
Is insane right now.
Rampant, guys. If you ain't tampering, you ain't trying. That's going to be just the words
Honestly.
going on nowadays. So, Ty, let the people know where they can find you today, as well as where you are floating around to with all these other channels.
Man, I don't even have a set schedule anymore. You can find me just here on YouTube. Yeah, don't be surprised if I pop up in a Mr. Beast video or something. No, you can find me at Around the Table Sports. You can find me on the Bama Standard. You can find me on SEC Connect. You can find me on Bama Football with Kyle Henderson. And off chance, every now and then you'll catch me over there on Bleacher Report.
That is what I'm talking about. Ty, once again, thanks for pulling up, boss.
Yes, sir.